I stood in the vault of the First National Bank on Walnut Street, staring into the empty metal cavity where my entire life should have been. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting everything in that harsh institutional glow that makes even important moments feel somehow cheaper. The bank manager shifted his weight behind me, and I could feel his discomfort radiating across the small space like heat from a radiator. The vault itself was colder than I remembered, not just temperature-wise, though the air conditioning did have that overzealous quality that banks seem to prefer. It was the kind of cold that settles into your chest and stays there, the kind that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. Compartment 247. I'd rented that safe deposit box 42 years ago, back when Paul was still alive, and we were young enough to believe in permanence. Every important document of our lives had rested in that metal drawer. The marriage certificate from 1978, with Paul's careful signature next to mine, the deed to our house on Frankfurt Avenue, the life insurance policy that had kept me afloat after he died, and most importantly, the will I'd updated just 18 months ago with Richard Chen's steady hand guiding me through each provision. I remember the day we'd first rented this box. Paul had worn his good suit, the navy one he saved for important occasions. We'd felt so adult, so responsible, standing in this very vault while a different manager, younger, more patient, had explained the security procedures. Paul had squeezed my hand while we'd placed our documents inside, and he'd said, "There. Now everything important is safe." All of it was gone. The emptiness wasn't just visual, it was physical. It was the feeling of reaching for something solid and finding only air. My hand actually trembled as I touched the bare metal interior, as if my fingers needed to confirm what my eyes were telling me. The surface was cool and smooth, utterly clean, as if nothing had ever been stored there at all. "Mrs. Patterson, are you absolutely certain you didn't move these items yourself?" The manager's voice carried that particular tone of careful patience that people use with the elderly, like they're speaking to children who might have misplaced their favorite toy. I turned to look at him. He was young, maybe 30, with that fresh-faced earnestness that comes from not yet understanding how badly people can hurt each other. His name tag said Michael. He probably went home every night to a small apartment in University City and called his mother on Sundays. He probably told her he loved her and meant it. He probably had no idea that daughters could become strangers, that love could curdle into something toxic and unrecognizable. "I'm certain," I said. My voice came out steady, and I was grateful for that. Sometimes when we get older, our memory can play tricks on us. He said it gently, kindly even, but I felt each word land like a small accusation. I see it all the time with our senior clients. They come in looking for things they moved months ago, or sometimes they forget they've already closed accounts. The implication hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "You're old. You're confused. You're not reliable." I could have told him that I remembered the exact date I'd updated my will. March 15th, 2024, a Tuesday, because Richard had squeezed me in between two corporate clients and apologized for the rushed timing. I could have told him that I remembered which documents were in which order, that the deed was always on top because Paul had insisted deeds should never be buried under other papers, that the insurance policy had a coffee stain on the bottom right corner from 1989 when I'd spilled my morning cup while reviewing it after Paul had his first health scare. But I didn't tell him any of that, because what made my hands shake wasn't the empty box. It was what I'd seen in the access log before he'd opened the vault. 3 entries, all within the past 4 months. All signed by Michelle Catherine Patterson, my daughter. The first visit was October 12th. The second was November 28th. The most recent was January 15th, just 2 weeks ago. Each signature was neat, practiced, confident. The signature of someone who had every right to be there. I'd stared at that log for a full minute before asking Michael to open the box. I'd stared at Michelle's handwriting, that distinctive slant to her M's, the way she crossed her T's with a little flourish at the end, and felt something crack inside my chest. When was the last time you personally accessed this box, Mrs. Patterson? Michael asked. 18 months ago, when I updated my will. He nodded slowly, making a note on his tablet. And your daughter has authorized access to this box. That was the question, wasn't it? I'd put Michelle's name on the access list 15 years ago, back when adding your daughter's name to things seemed like responsible planning. Back when I trusted her with everything I had. Back when the thought of her betraying me would have seemed as impossible as the sun rising in the west. Yes, I said. She has access. Then perhaps she moved the documents for safekeeping? Have you asked her about it? I hadn't asked her, because asking her would mean revealing that I knew, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what she'd done. Thank you for your help, I told Michael. I signed the paperwork confirming the box was empty, accepted his business card with the bank's customer service number printed in that impersonal corporate font, and walked out into the January cold. Philadelphia in January has a particular kind of cruelty. It's not the clean cold of snow-covered mountains or the dramatic cold of Arctic winds. It's a damp, penetrating cold that gets into your bones and stays there. The kind of cold that makes you feel older than you are. I stood on the corner of Walnut and 15th Street, watching people rush past with their heads down and their shoulders hunched against the wind. Young professionals heading back to their offices after lunch breaks, students from nearby universities hunched over their phones, tourists who'd picked the wrong season to visit the Liberty Bell. Everyone moving with purpose, everyone knowing where they were going. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward the bus stop. My hands were still shaking, but now I recognized the feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was rage, pure and simple, starting to burn through the shock. The same daughter who'd stood in my living room 3 months ago with tears streaming down her face, telling me she couldn't bear to watch me struggle alone anymore, who'd researched senior living facilities for weeks, making spreadsheets comparing amenities and costs and proximity to her house. Who'd toured Meadowbrook Senior, living with me on a rainy Tuesday in October, holding my hand while the administrator walked us through the sunny common rooms and the small but adequate private apartments. I remembered that tour so vividly now, with the clarity that hindsight sometimes brings. Michelle had asked all the right questions. What's the staff-to-resident ratio? What kind of medical support is available? Are there activities to keep residents engaged? She'd squeezed my hand when I'd gotten emotional looking at the small rooms, and she'd whispered, "It's okay to feel sad, Mom. This is a big change, but you'll be safe here. That's what matters." Who'd sat with me at my kitchen table while I signed the residency papers, her hand on my shoulder, her voice breaking in exactly the right places when she said, "I just want you to be safe, Mom. I just want to know you're taken care of." I'd believed every word. Why wouldn't I? I'd spent 68 years learning to trust my daughter. 68 years of evidence that she was the person I'd raised her to be. The bus was crowded with the afternoon rush. I found a seat near the back next to a teenager with headphones, lost in whatever music was playing loud enough that I could hear the bass line bleeding through. He didn't look at me. Nobody on the bus looked at me. That's one thing you learn about being elderly. You become invisible in a way you never were when you were young. People look through you, around you, past you, but never quite at you. I stared out the window as the bus rolled through Center City, watching the familiar streets blur past. Rittenhouse Square, where Paul had proposed to me 45 years ago, getting down on one knee in the middle of the park on a Sunday afternoon with half of Philadelphia watching. The library where I'd taken Michelle every Saturday when she was little, back when she'd loved the Magic Treehouse books and would read 3 in a single weekend, curled up in the big chair by my bed, reading out loud to me while I folded laundry. The restaurant where we'd celebrated her college graduation, her face glowing with possibilities, talking about all the things she was going to do with her business degree. When had it changed? When had my daughter become someone who could look me in the eye and lie? By the time I got back to Meadowbrook, it was almost dinner time. The facility smelled like institutional cooking. Not bad, exactly, but not quite right either. That particular combination of overcooked vegetables and commercial cleaning products that all nursing homes seem to share. Mrs. Patterson, the receptionist, a cheerful woman named Denise, waved at me from the front desk. You're just in time. They're serving pot roast tonight. Your favorite. I smiled at her because Denise was kind, and it wasn't her fault that I was here. Thank you, Denise. Your daughter called earlier, by the way. She wanted to make sure you were feeling okay. Said she'd try to visit this weekend. Of course she did. Michelle was nothing if not thorough. Regular check-ins, concerned phone calls, visits scheduled just often enough to maintain the appearance of a devoted daughter. I went to my room instead of the dining hall. Room 247, the same number as my safe deposit box, which felt like the universe's idea of a dark joke. 180 square feet that had replaced my 4-bedroom house in Fishtown. A single bed with a floral comforter I'd picked from a catalog. A small dresser. A desk by the window. A bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. It was fine. Actually, it was more than fine by nursing home standards. The staff was genuinely kind. The other residents were mostly pleasant. The activities coordinator organized art classes and movie nights and day trips to museums. If you had to be in a care facility, Meadowbrook was a good one, but I'd never needed to be here. That was the thing that kept circling back in my mind as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photos on my dresser. Michelle at her college graduation. Michelle's wedding. Michelle's kids as babies. Michelle. I'd fallen once, last February. I'd tripped over the edge of a rug in my hallway, caught myself on the wall, ended up with a bruised hip and a scraped palm. I'd called Michelle to tell her I was fine, that it was nothing, that the rug was old and I'd been meaning to replace it anyway. She'd driven over immediately. She'd inspected every room in my house like a safety inspector, pointing out loose floorboards and uneven thresholds and stairs that were too steep for someone your age. She'd pulled up statistics on her phone about elderly falls, about broken hips, about how many seniors died from complications within a year of a major fall. I remember her standing at the bottom of my stairs, looking up at them like they were a death trap. Mom, these stairs are almost 70 years old. The treads are worn. The railing wobbles. What if you fall down them? What if you break your neck? Mom, I'm scared, she'd said, and her fear had seemed so genuine. What if next time you're not lucky? What if you fall and can't get to the phone? What if something happens and I don't find you for days? She'd painted such vivid pictures of disaster. Me lying on the floor for days, unable to reach help. Me breaking a hip and dying in the hospital from complications. Me slowly declining in cognitive function, too stubborn to admit I needed help, until something catastrophic happened. She'd planted seeds of doubt so carefully, made me question my own capability, made me afraid of my own home, and I'd let her. I stood up and went to the window. My room overlooked the parking lot, which wasn't much of a view, but I could see a slice of sky between the buildings. The sun was setting, turning everything orange and pink. It was beautiful in that way winter sunsets often are, all that color to compensate for the cold. Something crystallized in my mind as I watched the light fade. Nobody would believe me if I simply called Michelle and accused her of stealing my documents. She'd tell everyone I was confused, declining, paranoid. She'd use my age against me like a weapon, the same way she'd used my one fall to convince me I couldn't live safely at home. I'd already seen how easily people accepted narratives about elderly confusion. Last week, the nurse had changed my blood pressure medication without asking me first. When I'd questioned it, she'd patted my hand with that same careful patience and said, "It's okay, Mrs. Patterson. Your daughter approved the change with Dr. Morrison. She's keeping such good track of your health care." Michelle had access to my medical decisions. Michelle had convinced the staff that I needed their protection from my own forgetfulness. Michelle had built a perfect framework where any accusation I made would sound like evidence of the very confusion she claimed I was experiencing. If I was going to confront her, I needed proof. I needed documentation so clear, so undeniable, that she couldn't twist it into more evidence of my incompetence. I needed to know exactly what she'd done before she could rewrite the story. I needed to investigate my own daughter. The thought settled over me like that January cold, uncomfortable, penetrating, impossible to ignore, but also clarifying. I'd spent 3 months in a fog of grief and displacement, trying to adjust to my new life. Now I had a purpose. I sat down at the small desk by my window and pulled out a notepad. I started making a list of everyone I needed to call. My first call the next morning was to Patricia Henshaw. Patricia had been my real estate agent for 30 years. She'd sold me my house in Fishtown back in 1989, had handled the sale of Paul's mother's property in 2003, had become more friend than business associate over the decades. If anyone knew what was happening with my house, it would be Patricia. Her number was still in my phone. I'd kept everyone's number, even after moving to Meadowbrook, even though Michelle had suggested I might find it less confusing to start fresh with just essential contacts. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. "Helen!" Her voice was bright, but I could hear something underneath it. Nervousness, maybe. "How are you? How's the new place?" "It's fine, Patricia. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." The pause told me everything I needed to know. It lasted just a beat too long, filled with all the words she was trying to decide whether to say. "Of course," she said, but her voice had lost its brightness. "Has anyone contacted you about my house?" Another pause, then a nervous laugh, too high, too quick. The laugh of someone caught in an uncomfortable position. "Oh, Helen, I really think you should talk to Michelle about— Patricia, please." I heard her take a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost apologetic. "Michelle asked me not to upset you with the details. She said you knew about the sale, but that it would stress you out to be involved in the logistics. She said your doctor recommended that you not worry about property management during your adjustment to Meadowbrook." Each word hit like a small, precise blow. My sale, my house, my stress, my adjustment. All filtered through Michelle's interpretation of what I needed. "What sale, Patricia?" "Helen." Now Patricia's voice carried real distress. "Do you not know about this? When did she list my house?" 6 weeks ago, around the 1st of December. Helen, she had power of attorney documents, and everything looked completely legitimate, and I truly thought you'd agreed to this. She said you'd made the decision together, that you wanted to sell while the market was good, so you could afford better care. 6 weeks ago, while I was sitting in Meadowbrook's dining room eating pot roast and playing cards with the other residents, Michelle was listing my house for sale. "Patricia, I need you to tell me everything. When did she first contact you about this?" I heard papers shuffling. "Let me check my records. She called me in late October, right after you moved into Meadowbrook. She said you'd decided to sell, but that the stress of the move had been hard on you, that you needed time to adjust before dealing with the sale. She asked me to wait a few weeks before officially listing it." "What else did she say?" "She talked about the condition of the house, said it needed some updates to maximize the sale price. She seemed very knowledgeable about the market, very prepared. She had comps from the neighborhood, renovation estimates, everything. She presented it all very professionally." Of course she did. Michelle had always been good at presentations. "What's the asking price?" $340,000. Helen, if I'd known you weren't aware of this, I never would have— "It's not your fault, Patricia. Thank you for telling me the truth." I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't just rage. It was the physical manifestation of understanding, the moment when suspicion crystallizes into certainty. Michelle was selling my house. The house Paul and I had bought for $97,000 in 1989, back when Fishtown was still a working-class neighborhood before the gentrification came. The house where we'd raised Michelle, where we'd hosted birthday parties in the backyard and Christmas dinners at the dining room table. The house where Paul had died in our bedroom, peacefully in his sleep, with me holding his hand. The house that was worth $340,000 now because Philadelphia's real estate market had exploded and property in Fishtown had become desirable to young professionals who wanted authentic urban living. My house. Michelle was selling my house without my knowledge or consent. I thought about the power of attorney Patricia had mentioned. I'd never signed power of attorney over to Michelle. I was certain of that. Power of attorney was serious. It was giving someone else complete control over your life. I would have remembered signing something like that. But then I thought about the day I moved into Meadowbrook. The stack of documents Michelle had prepared with little tabs marking each signature line. The way she'd guided me through them while I was exhausted from packing, emotionally drained from saying goodbye to my home. Just here, Mom, and here, and here. Just standard facility paperwork. I'd signed everything she'd put in front of me. I'd trusted her to be handling the bureaucratic details while I dealt with the emotional weight of the transition. Had one of those documents been power of attorney? Had she slipped it into the stack while I was too overwhelmed to read carefully? Or had she forged my signature entirely? Either way, I'd been a fool. I made my second call to Dorothy Kowalski, my neighbor of 33 years. Dorothy was 74, sharp as ever, and had lived in the house next to mine since before Michelle was born. If anything was happening with my property, Dorothy would know. Helen, Dorothy's voice was warm, genuinely happy to hear from me. I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you managing over there? I'm fine, Dorothy. I need to ask you something. What's happening with my house? The warmth in her voice shifted to something more cautious. Oh, honey. There was pity there now, and I hated it. There have been contractors there for weeks, since right after Thanksgiving. They're renovating everything. The kitchen, both bathrooms, refinishing all the floors. The noise has been constant. My stomach dropped. Contractors? Big project. Must have cost $70,000 or $80,000 at least, maybe more. Michelle told me it was preparation for selling, that she wanted to maximize the value. She called it an investment property now. An investment. My home where I'd lived for 35 years, where I'd buried my husband's ashes in the backyard garden, where every corner held a memory. It was an investment property. Dorothy, can you describe what they've done? I want to know everything. Well, let's see. They gutted the kitchen completely. I saw them carrying out your old cabinets, your stove, everything. They brought in new ones, fancy looking. Granite countertops, I think. The bathrooms got the same treatment. And the floors, they've been sanding and refinishing all the hardwood. The whole house smells like varnish. Each detail felt like a small violence. My kitchen, the one I'd cooked Michelle's birthday cakes in, the one where Paul and I had shared morning coffee for decades, ripped out and replaced. Has Michelle been there often? Every few days, usually with Derek. They bring lunch sometimes and eat on the front step while supervising the work. They seem to be getting along much better these days. Derek, Michelle's ex-husband Derek, the man she'd divorced 8 years ago after 15 years of marriage. The man whose business I'd helped fund with $85,000 from my home equity. They're back together? I asked. That's what it looks like. She told me they were working on reconciliation, that they'd realized they'd given up too soon. She seemed really happy about it, Helen. Said they were planning a fresh start. A fresh start. In my house. Using my money. Dorothy, did she say anything else about their plans? Just that they'd wasted years being apart when they could have been building something together. She said something about how this renovation was symbolic, like they were renovating their relationship too. She got quite poetic about it, actually. After I hung up with Dorothy, I sat very still for a long time. The room felt smaller than usual, like the walls were pressing in. Through the window, I could see other residents walking the paths in the garden, bundled against the cold. Mrs. Chen from down the hall. Mr. Rodriguez with his walker. Normal people living their normal nursing home lives. I wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't my normal. This was Michelle's construction. I made my third call to the contractor. I'd used the same company for years, Rodriguez and Sons Construction. They'd fixed my roof after Hurricane Sandy, replaced my front steps, installed new windows in 2019. If they were doing the renovation on my house, they might talk to me. Carlos Rodriguez Sr. answered on the second ring. Mrs. Patterson, how are you doing? We heard you moved to a facility. How's that treating you? It's fine, Carlos. I heard you're working on my house. Oh, yes. Big project. Your daughter has great taste. The kitchen is going to be beautiful. All new cabinets, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. And we're doing both bathrooms top to bottom. She said to spare no expense. Spare no expense? With whose money? It sounds lovely. How much is the total project running? Let me check. I heard papers rustling. With everything. Materials, labor, permits. We're looking at about $82,000. But it's worth it. Really transforming the place. $82,000. Michelle had spent $82,000 renovating my house so she could sell it for $340,000. Carlos, can I ask you something? Has Michelle mentioned what she's planning to do with the house once the renovation is complete? Oh, she said once the work is done, she and Derek are moving in. Fresh start, she called it. She was really excited about it. They came by last week to look at the new kitchen cabinets, and they were talking about hosting Thanksgiving there next year, about how they'd finally have a real home to build their life in. My vision actually blurred for a moment. The room tilted slightly, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. Not selling. Moving in. Michelle wasn't renovating my house to sell it. She was renovating it to live in it. With Derek, the ex-husband she'd reconciled with. In the house, she'd convinced me to leave because I was too old to maintain it safely. Mrs. Patterson? Are you still there? I'm here. Thank you, Carlos. I ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of my room. I hadn't turned on the lights, and the winter sun was setting early, casting long shadows across the floor. Let me tell you what I'd given Michelle over the years. Not abstract maternal love, not emotional support, though I'd given those too. I mean actual, quantifiable pieces of my life that could be measured in dollars and hours and sacrifice. In 1989, I withdrew $32,000 from my retirement account to pay her tuition at Temple University. Paul's construction business had failed that year, caught in the recession that hit the building industry particularly hard. We'd lost almost everything. But Michelle had already been accepted to Temple, had already planned her whole future around that acceptance. That $32,000 was 3 full years of my salary as a school secretary at Lincoln Elementary. I'd worked that job for 12 years, 9 to 4, managing schedules and attendance records and parent communications. I'd saved every extra dollar I could squeeze from my paycheck, putting it away for retirement because Paul's business was too unstable to count on. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for 3 years to save that money. I'd bought my clothes at thrift stores. I'd cut my own hair. Every penny had been earmarked for my future, for the day when I wouldn't be able to work anymore. I gave it all to Michelle for college. Not a loan, a gift. Because that's what mothers do for their daughters. In 2003, I took out a second mortgage on my house. $85,000. Paul had been dead for 2 years, and I was still finding my footing as a widow. Michelle and Derek wanted to start a catering business. They had plans, projections, a business proposal they'd worked on for months. Mom, this is our chance, Michelle had said, sitting at my kitchen table with spreadsheets fanned out in front of her. We just need the startup capital. We'll pay you back within 5 years, I promise, with interest. I'd believed her. I'd signed the mortgage papers, watched my monthly payment nearly double, given them $85,000 to chase their dream. They'd never paid back a single dollar. The business had struggled for years before finally stabilizing, but by then, they'd apparently forgotten about the debt they owed me. And I'd never pushed it. You don't put a price on your daughter's dreams. In 2015, When Michelle's marriage to Derek fell apart, she'd needed a lawyer. A good lawyer, she said. Someone who could make sure Derek didn't take advantage of her in the divorce settlement. He's going to try to claim half of everything, Mom. The business we built together, the house, the savings. I need someone who can protect me. I gave her $47,000 for her divorce attorney. I'd been saving it for the kitchen renovation I'd been planning for 20 years. The cabinets were falling apart. The linoleum was cracked. The stove was from 1987. But Michelle needed protection from Derek more than I needed new cabinets. I never got that kitchen renovation. I lived with those failing cabinets, that cracked linoleum, that ancient stove for another 9 years, until Michelle spent $82,000 giving herself the kitchen I'd sacrificed. But it wasn't just the money. It was the time. For 9 years, I watched Michelle's kids every Thursday and every Saturday. Thursday afternoons from 2 to 8, and Saturdays from 9 to 5. Michelle was building her business. Derek was managing contracts. They needed reliable childcare. Mom, you know we can't afford a nanny, and you're so good with them. Please? So I drove 45 minutes each way, from my house in Fishtown to their house in the suburbs. I canceled my book club that met on Thursday evenings. I quit my gardening group that did community projects on Saturdays. I gave up my watercolor classes at the community center. I calculated it once during a sleepless night. 9 years, 2 days per week, averaging 8 hours each time. That was approximately 936 days of my life. Spent changing diapers and making snacks and helping with homework and playing endless games of Candyland. I did it because I loved my grandchildren, but also because Michelle said she needed me. When her son Jacob needed braces, the insurance only covered half. Michelle called me, voice tight with stress. Mom, it's $6,800. We don't have it right now. The business is slow this quarter. I wrote the check. When her daughter Emma wanted to go to that expensive summer camp in the Poconos, the one all her friends were attending, Michelle called again. Mom, I hate to ask, but Emma's heart is set on this. It's $3,200 for the 2-week session. I wrote that check too. When Derek's mother got sick with cancer and needed someone to help with shopping and errands, I was the one who showed up every week for 2 years. Not Michelle. She was too busy with the business. But I'd drive out to Derek's mother's house in Doylestown with groceries and prescriptions and whatever else she needed. You're so good at this, Mom, Michelle had said. You have more time than we do. I'd never asked for gratitude. I was her mother. This was what mothers did for their children. You gave and you gave and you gave because that's what love meant. But I'd never expected this. I'd never imagined that all my giving would become a foundation for her to take even more. I turned on my desk lamp as the room grew too dark to see. The sudden light felt harsh, exposing the smallness of my space. 180 square feet that I'd traded for a 4-bedroom house in Fishtown because Michelle had convinced me I couldn't manage on my own. The house she was now renovating with my grandson's braces money. The house she was planning to move into with the ex-husband whose divorce I'd funded. I needed to know one more thing. I needed to understand the full scope of this. I called Richard Chen's office the next morning. Richard had been Paul's lawyer for the last 15 years of Paul's life, and he'd become mine after Paul died. He'd drafted my will 18 months ago, sitting in his office on Chestnut Street while I explained exactly how I wanted things divided. His secretary put me through immediately. Helen, it's good to hear from you. How are you settling in at Meadowbrook? I'm fine, Richard. I need to ask you something important. Do you still have a copy of my will? Of course. We keep copies of all documents for 7 years minimum. Why do you ask? Could you tell me what it says? There was a pause. Helen, you know I can't discuss specific provisions over the phone without proper authorization and security verification. But I can tell you the basic framework. Your estate was divided between Michelle and your granddaughter Sarah, with specific provisions about the house and your retirement accounts. Is something wrong? Sarah. My granddaughter, Michelle's daughter, who just turned 22 last November. The one who'd stopped visiting me 3 months ago, right around the time I moved into Meadowbrook. What kind of provisions about the house? Those details really require an in-person meeting with proper identification and security protocols. But Helen, if you're concerned about something, we should schedule an appointment immediately. Is there something specific you're worried about? I was worried about everything, but I was starting to understand the full picture. Richard, did I give Michelle power of attorney? Another pause, longer this time. Not through this office. The last time we updated your documents was 18 months ago, and at that time, you explicitly declined to establish power of attorney. You said you wanted to maintain full control over your own affairs as long as you were competent. So Michelle had forged it, or tricked me into signing it, or somehow manufactured it without my knowing consent. Richard, I need to come see you. Can we meet today? I'll make time. 2 o'clock? I'll be there. After I hung up, I sat very still, thinking about my will. The one I'd updated 18 months ago with Richard's guidance. I'd divided my estate equally between Michelle and Sarah, 50% to my daughter, 50% to my granddaughter. The house alone was worth $340,000 now, probably more after the renovation. My retirement accounts held another $130,000. My savings had $46,000. Life insurance would pay out $50,000. Total estate value, roughly $566,000. Split 2 ways, $283,000 each for Michelle and Sarah. But Sarah was young. Sarah was 22, still in school at Penn State studying environmental science. Sarah would ask questions about what happened to her grandmother's house. Sarah would want to understand why I'd sold it, where the money had gone, whether I was being properly cared for. Unless Sarah never knew what she was entitled to, unless the will disappeared and was replaced with something different, something where Michelle was the sole beneficiary, something that showed I'd already spent down most of my assets on nursing home care and medical expenses. And if the original will disappeared, if my safe deposit box was conveniently empty, who would prove otherwise? Michelle could claim I'd updated my will again, that I'd decided to leave everything to her because Sarah was too young to manage an inheritance responsibly. She could produce documents showing I'd needed expensive care, that the nursing home was depleting my savings, that there was barely anything left to inherit anyway. She could rewrite my entire story to suit her needs. And I'd be sitting in Meadowbrook, the confused elderly woman who couldn't manage her own affairs, whose daughter was heroically trying to handle everything. I'd been useful. My signature, my social security number, my property, my credibility, all tools in Michelle's plan. She hadn't just stolen from me. She'd used me to legitimize the theft. That realization burned worse than the betrayal. It was one thing to be robbed. It was another to be made complicit in your own robbing. I needed help, and I knew exactly where to find it. Paul's law partner, Marcus Okonkwo. Paul had worked with Marcus for 31 years at their firm, Patterson and Okonkwo Legal Services. They'd started together right out of law school, built their practice from nothing into something respectable. When Paul died, Marcus had given the eulogy at the funeral. He'd held my hand during the reception and said, "Helen, if you ever need anything at all, you call me first." Marcus was 72 now, semi-retired, but he still maintained a small practice handling estate work and consultations. I'd seen him at the annual holiday party the firm still threw, just last year before I moved to Meadowbrook. I called his office and got his assistant, a woman named Joan who'd been with the firm for 20 years. "Mrs. Patterson, how wonderful to hear from you. Marcus will want to talk to you. Hold on." The hold music was classical, something by Bach. I listened to it for less than 30 seconds before Marcus picked up. "Helen Patterson," he said, and his voice was warm, but also something else. Knowing. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "You were?" Paul made me promise something before he died. He asked me to check on you every year, quietly, just to make sure you were all right. Nothing intrusive, just making sure nobody was taking advantage of you. I've been doing that for 8 years now. And Helen, what I've discovered in the past 3 months has troubled me greatly." My throat tightened. "What did you discover?" "Your daughter filed for guardianship proceedings 4 months ago. The petition was denied because the court-appointed evaluator deemed you fully competent, but she initiated the process. That's public record, accessible to anyone who knows where to look. I also learned she'd been making inquiries about your assets with various financial institutions, claiming to be acting on your behalf under power of attorney. Several banks flagged the activity as potentially concerning and contacted Adult Protective Services, but the investigations went nowhere because she produced seemingly legitimate documentation. Guardianship. Michelle had tried to get legal guardianship over me, complete control over my person, my property, my medical decisions, everything. "Paul knew this might happen?" I asked. "Not specifically, but he worried. Michelle had borrowed money from him 3 times in the 5 years before he died. Significant amounts. 20,000 here, 15,000 there. He'd seen a pattern of financial instability combined with a sense of entitlement. Before he passed, he sat me down and said, 'Marcus, if anything happens to Helen, if she seems to suddenly need care or can't manage on her own, look closely. Make sure it's real and not manufactured. Make sure my daughter isn't using her mother's age as a weapon.'" I couldn't speak for a moment. Paul had known. He'd tried to protect me even from beyond the grave, even from the daughter we'd raised together. "Paul left copies of all your important documents with me," Marcus continued, "including your will, your property deed, your insurance policies, everything. And I think it's time we had a meeting to go over exactly what's been happening and what we can do about it. I'm meeting with Richard Chen at 2 today. Perfect. Come see me at 4. My office. And Helen, don't tell Michelle you're doing this. Not yet. I won't. Good. See you at 4. For 3 days after my meetings with Richard and Marcus, I did nothing but prepare. I gathered documents, made notes, practiced what I would say. Marcus had given me copies of everything: the real will, the power of attorney Michelle had forged into the nursing home paperwork, the guardianship petition she'd filed and lost. The meetings themselves had been revelatory in ways I hadn't expected. Richard's office still looked exactly as it had 18 months ago when I'd updated my will. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chairs, the same framed diplomas on the wall. But I'd been a different person then. I'd been a woman who still trusted her daughter completely. "Helen," Richard had said, spreading the documents across his desk, "I want you to understand something important. When you came to me 18 months ago to update your will, you were absolutely clear about your intentions. You wanted Michelle and Sarah to share equally. You specifically told me that Sarah deserved her inheritance free and clear, that she shouldn't have to rely on her mother's discretion to receive what was rightfully hers. I'd remembered saying that. I'd had a feeling even then, some maternal instinct whispering warnings I hadn't wanted to hear. You also," Richard continued, "explicitly refused to grant power of attorney to anyone. You said, and I quote, 'I'm not ready to hand over control of my life. I'm still perfectly capable of making my own decisions.' And we had a whole conversation about it. You were adamant." The power of attorney document Michelle had used was a masterful forgery. Richard showed me the differences, subtle variations in the signature, a slightly different date format, legal language that didn't quite match his firm's standard templates. To most people, it would look legitimate, but to a lawyer who'd worked with me for years, the inconsistencies were glaring. Marcus's office had been different, smaller, more personal, filled with photographs of his family and mementos from his decades of practice. He'd sat across from me, his dark eyes serious, and said, "Paul asked me to protect you. I promised him I would. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner." "You couldn't have known," I'd told him. "I should have suspected. The guardianship petition was a red flag. When that failed, I should have realized she'd find another way. He'd pulled out a thick folder. I've been documenting everything for the past 2 months. Every financial inquiry, every forged signature, every lie she's told to institutions. This is airtight, Helen. If we go to court, she won't have a leg to stand on. Richard had walked me through every provision of my actual will, confirming what I'd remembered. Equal division between Michelle and Sarah, with specific instructions that the house could not be sold unless I explicitly agreed in writing or after my death. Michelle had violated every single one of those provisions. She'd forged documents, lied to professionals, manipulated financial institutions, and constructed an elaborate fiction where I was a failing elderly woman who needed her capable daughter to manage everything. I stood in front of the mirror in my tiny bathroom practicing my words. I needed to be calm. I needed to be cold. I needed to be absolutely unshakable when I confronted her. The woman staring back at me in that mirror looked older than I felt inside. 68 years had left their marks. Lines around my eyes, gray in my hair, a softness to my jaw that hadn't been there in my youth. But my eyes were clear, my gaze was steady, and there was something new there, something that hadn't existed 3 months ago when Michelle had moved me into this place. Strength, anger, purpose. I practiced my opening line. I went to the bank 2 weeks ago. Calm, matter of fact. No emotion to give her an opening to claim I was being irrational. I practiced my response to her inevitable denials. Your signature is in the access log. Facts, just facts. Undeniable and documented. I imagined her excuses. She'd probably cry. Michelle had always been good at crying at exactly the right moments. She'd learned as a child that tears could soften my resolve, could make me reconsider punishments, could transform her from the transgressor to the victim. But I was done being softened. I imagined her tears, her accusations that I was confused, her attempts to turn this back on me. Mom, you're not remembering correctly. Mom, I was just trying to help. Mom, you're getting upset over a misunderstanding. I prepared answers for everything. Calm answers, cold answers, answers backed by documents and lawyers and irrefutable evidence. But what I kept coming back to, what played in my mind on an endless loop, was something she'd said the day she moved me into Meadowbrook. I'd been standing in my living room, surrounded by boxes, crying because I was saying goodbye to the home I'd lived in for 35 years. Michelle had wrapped her arms around me, and I'd felt her warmth, her solidity, her seeming love. She'd stroked my hair like I used to stroke hers when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. Mom, she'd whispered against my shoulder, you don't need all this space anymore. You don't need these things. It's time to simplify. It's time to let go. You don't need these things. My home, my independence, my choices, my dignity, my life. I was going to give her back those exact words. I was going to make her understand what they meant when they were used as weapons instead of comfort. On the 4th day, I called Michelle and asked her to have lunch with me at Meadowbrook. My voice was calm, almost cheerful. I know you're busy, honey, but I haven't seen you in 2 weeks and I miss you. Could you spare an hour? Of course, Mom. I'll come tomorrow. Noon, okay? Perfect. She arrived the next day with flowers. Yellow roses, my favorite, in a simple glass vase. She was dressed in her business casual clothes, nice jeans, a cashmere sweater, the kind of outfit that said successful small business owner. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was subtle but expertly applied. She looked like every daughter should look when visiting her mother in a nursing home. Concerned, caring, devoted. Mom! She kissed my cheek and put the flowers on the table between us. You look wonderful. Have you been feeling okay? We were in a small private dining room that the facility made available for family visits. I'd requested it specifically. Privacy, but not too much privacy. The door had a window. Staff walked past regularly. Witnesses nearby if I needed them. Sit down, Michelle. Something in my voice made her hesitate. Her smile flickered, just for a second. But she recovered quickly and sat down across from me. She put the flowers between us like a shield. "I went to the bank 2 weeks ago," I said. Her smile never wavered, but I watched her eyes. There was a tiny tightening at the corners. "Oh? That's good. Getting out is healthy for you. Which bank?" "First National. Walnut Street branch." I opened my safe deposit box. Now the smile did flicker, just for a heartbeat. "I don't understand." It was empty. Everything was gone. My will, my deed, my insurance policies. Everything I'd kept there for 42 years. "Mom, I think you're confused. Maybe we should talk to the nurse about whether your medications might be—" "You've been there 3 times in the past 4 months. The last time was January 15th, 2 weeks ago, the day after I was there. Your signature is in the access log." Her face went pale. It was subtle, but I'd known this face for 46 years. I could read every shift in her expression like a well-worn book. "I spoke to Richard Chen," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "He still has copies of everything. My real will, the one I signed 18 months ago. Not whatever version you were planning to substitute." Michelle opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I watched her scramble for a response, watched her try to find the right combination of words that would make this go away. "I also spoke to Patricia Henshaw," I said. "I know you're selling my house, or rather you listed it for sale 6 weeks ago. $340,000. Mom, you don't understand the financial pressures I'm under. And I spoke to Dorothy Kowalski and Carlos Rodriguez. I know about the $82,000 renovation. I know you and Derek are planning to move into my house together. Fresh start, you called it." Her hands were shaking now. She folded them on the table, trying to hide it, but I saw. "I spoke to Marcus Okonkwo," I continued, each name landing like a hammer blow. "I know you filed for guardianship and were denied. I know you've been accessing my financial accounts. I know you forged power of attorney documents. I know everything, Michelle." The color drained completely from her face now. She looked like she might be sick. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice was higher than normal, strained. "You don't know what it's been like for me. The stress, the pressure, trying to keep the business afloat, trying to manage everything. You needed my house. You needed me out of the way." "That's not— Mom, you're making this sound so ugly. I was trying to help you. You couldn't manage that big house anymore, and the nursing home is expensive. And I thought if we could just— You thought if you could steal my will and forge power of attorney, you could sell everything and keep it all for yourself. And Sarah would never know what she was entitled to." Michelle's eyes went wide. She hadn't expected me to figure that part out. "Does Sarah know you're stealing her inheritance?" I asked softly. "I'm not stealing anything." The words burst out of her, loud enough that a staff member walking past the window glanced in. Michelle lowered her voice. "That house needs too much work. It's not worth what it could be worth. And Sarah's just a kid. She doesn't understand property values or market conditions or—" She stopped, hearing herself, hearing the admission. "Go on," I said. "Tell me more about what Sarah doesn't understand." Michelle's face twisted. For a moment, I saw something there. Shame, maybe, or the recognition of what she'd done. But then it hardened into something uglier, something defensive and angry. "I deserve this," she said, and now her voice was shaking with emotion. Real emotion, not the performance she'd been giving. "Do you know how much I've sacrificed? I gave up my career to have kids. I spent years building a business from nothing. I went through a divorce that nearly destroyed me. I've been through hell, and you've always had this house, this security, this nest egg, and you don't even appreciate— I gave you $32,000 for college," I said, my voice cutting through hers. $85,000 for your business, $47,000 for your divorce, 9 years of free childcare. I gave you my retirement, my hobbies, my kitchen renovation, my savings. What exactly did I fail to appreciate, Michelle? She stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. You got every dollar I had to give, I continued. You got every hour I could spare. You got everything I was, and it still wasn't enough. You needed my house, too. You needed my independence. You needed me erased so you could take what was left. That was your choice. The words came out sharp, defensive. That's what mothers do. That's what you're supposed to do for your children. And what are daughters supposed to do for their mothers? Put them in nursing homes under false pretenses so they can forge documents and steal houses. You needed to be here. You fell last year, remember? You couldn't manage that big house by yourself. You couldn't. I tripped over a rug once. I was fine. And you used it as an excuse to convince me I wasn't safe in my own home. You made me afraid. You manipulated me. Her hands were shaking harder now. She grabbed her purse like she was thinking about leaving, but she didn't stand up. What do you want from me? She asked. Her voice was small now, defeated. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to sign my house back over to me. You're going to withdraw any claims on my financial accounts. You're going to return every document you took from the bank. And you're going to explain to Sarah exactly what you tried to do. And if I don't? Marcus Okonkwo has prepared fraud charges, forgery charges, and elder abuse charges. We can file them tomorrow. The evidence is documented and undeniable. Your choice. Michelle's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, fear, anger, calculation. I watched her try to find a way out, watched her search for some angle that would let her escape this. There was a long silence. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear footsteps in the hallway outside, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. You would actually do that? She finally asked. You would actually send your own daughter to jail. You would actually steal from your own mother? I countered. You would actually forge documents and lie and manipulate and construct an entire false reality just to get a house? She looked down at her hands. It wasn't just about the house. Then what was it about? It was about finally having something that was mine, something I didn't have to share or split or give half of to someone else. Derek and we were going to build something real this time. We were going to have a home that was actually ours, not rented, not mortgaged to the hilt, not dependent on whether the next catering contract came through, just ours. Built on my erasure, I said. She looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes now. Real ones, I thought. I didn't think you'd ever know. I thought you'd be happy here. I thought you'd adjust and make friends and forget about that big empty house. I thought everyone would be better off. Everyone except me. Fine. The word came out like a slap. Take it all back. Take your precious house and your precious independence and your precious control. But don't expect me to keep visiting. Don't expect me to help when you actually do need care. Don't expect me to be there when you fall and break your hip or when you have a stroke or when you're dying alone in that house you care about more than your own daughter. Michelle, you haven't helped me in years. You've used me. There's a difference. Her face crumpled. For a second, she looked exactly like she had when she was 7 years old and I'd caught her lying about stealing cookies from the jar. That same expression of knowing she'd been caught, knowing she'd done wrong, hoping I'd forgive her anyway. But then her expression hardened into something else entirely. You know what your problem is, Mom. Her voice was cold now, stripped of all the performance. You think you're owed something for being a parent. You're not. Everything you gave me was your job. You chose to have a child. You chose to pay for my college and my business and my divorce. Nobody forced you. That was all your choice. There it was, the truth she'd been hiding under all those tears and hugs and protestations of love. You're right, I said quietly. I'm not owed anything for being your mother, but I'm owed basic human decency, and you couldn't even give me that. She grabbed her purse and stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. As she did, she knocked the vase of flowers off the table. It shattered on the linoleum, water spreading across the floor in a widening puddle, glass shards scattering, yellow petals floating in the mess. She stared at it for a moment. Then she looked at me with something close to hatred in her eyes. "You won't survive without me," she said. I looked right back at her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I survived without you for 68 years before you were born. I'll manage just fine." She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the floor, sharp and angry. I watched her through the window as she strode past the nurse's station, past the common room where other residents were having lunch, past Denise at the reception desk. I watched until she was completely out of sight. Then I let my hand shake. A staff member came in with a mop to clean up the broken flowers. "Are you okay, Mrs. Patterson?" "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it. Marcus filed the paperwork the next day. All of it. The documentation of Michelle's fraud, the forgery evidence, the proof of elder abuse. He sent it to Michelle's lawyer with a simple message: "Sign the house and all financial claims back over to Helen Patterson within 72 hours, or we file criminal charges." Michelle's lawyer called Marcus within 4 hours. "My client is willing to comply with all requests." The paperwork was signed by the end of the week. My house was mine again. My financial accounts were unfrozen. The forged power of attorney was voided. Michelle withdrew any and all claims to manage my affairs. I thought that would be the end of it. The legal resolution, the property returned, justice served in the cold language of contracts and filings. But 3 days after Michelle signed everything over, something happened that I didn't expect. Sarah showed up at Meadowbrook. I was in the common room playing cards with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez when Denise came to find me. "Mrs. Patterson, your granddaughter is here to see you." Sarah was waiting in the same small dining room where I'd confronted Michelle. She stood up when I came in, and I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her face was blotchy. She looked younger than 22, more like the little girl who used to run into my arms when I picked her up from preschool. "Grandma." Her voice broke. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know what she was doing." I sat down across from her. "I believe you, sweetheart. She told me you wanted to sell the house. She said you'd asked her to handle it because it was too stressful for you to be involved in the logistics. She made it sound like she was helping you, like she was taking this burden off your shoulders." The words tumbled out fast, desperate. "I thought I was respecting your wishes by staying away, by not bothering you while you adjusted to being here." Of course, Michelle had isolated me by convincing everyone it was what I wanted. She'd removed potential witnesses, potential questions, potential interference. "She told me you were leaving everything to her in your will because I was too young to manage an inheritance responsibly," Sarah continued. "She said you'd made that decision and I needed to respect it even if it hurt my feelings. I felt hurt, Grandma. I felt like maybe you didn't trust me, or didn't think I was capable. But I thought maybe you were right. Maybe I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility." "Sarah, listen to me." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I left everything split equally between you and your mother because you're both my family. Your mother decided she deserved more." Sarah wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I should have questioned it. I should have visited you more. I should have called you directly instead of just believing what Mom told me. I'm so sorry. You trusted your mother. That's not a crime. I did too." We sat together for a long time. She told me about school, about her environmental science program at Penn State, about the research project she was working on studying the impact of urban green spaces on air quality. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her work, and I remembered how much I'd missed in 3 months of isolation. She told me about her professor, Dr. Martinez, who'd encouraged her to apply for a prestigious research grant. She described her experiments, measuring particulate matter in different neighborhoods, comparing areas with lots of trees to concrete-heavy zones. She talked about her data with such passion, such intelligence, and I felt proud and sad at the same time, proud of who she'd become, sad that Michelle had kept us apart during these important months. She told me about her boyfriend, a sweet kid named Daniel who was studying architecture. They'd met in a sustainability course and bonded over their shared passion for creating environmentally responsible urban design. "He wants to design buildings that work with nature instead of against it," Sarah said, and her face glowed when she talked about him. Green roofs, passive solar heating, rainwater collection systems. "He's brilliant, Grandma. I think you'd really like him." She told me about their plans after graduation, about the nonprofit she wanted to work for that helped cities develop green infrastructure. She showed me pictures on her phone of urban gardens in Philadelphia, explaining how they reduced heat island effects and improved air quality. I realized how much of her life I'd missed while sitting in Meadowbrook, believing that I was doing what was best for everyone. Before she left, she asked, "Are you going to move back into your house?" I thought about it. The truth was, I'd been happy at Meadowbrook before I knew it was a cage. The people were genuinely kind. The food was decent. I'd made friends with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Anderson who played cards with me every Tuesday. I didn't need 4 bedrooms and a yard I couldn't keep up with anymore. But I needed it to be my choice. "I'm going to keep the house," I said, "and I'm going to decide what to do with it on my own terms. Maybe I'll sell it and move somewhere sunny. Maybe I'll gift it to you when you graduate. Maybe I'll keep it just to know I can, but it's going to be my decision." Sarah hugged me before she left. "I'm going to visit every Sunday from now on," she said. "No matter what Mom says. I'd like that." 3 weeks later, I moved back into my house in Fishtown. The moving process was simpler than I expected. I'd only been at Meadowbrook for 3 months, so I hadn't accumulated much. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Anderson came to say goodbye, and I promised I'd visit them for Tuesday card games. Denise at the front desk hugged me and said she was happy for me, though I could see the confusion in her eyes. Most residents didn't leave Meadowbrook voluntarily. Sarah helped me pack. She'd taken a week off from school to be here for the transition. We loaded everything into her aging Honda Civic, my clothes, my photos, the few personal items I'd brought with me. It all fit easily. "Grandma," she said as we drove through the gray Philadelphia streets toward Fishtown, "I'm so proud of you. What you did. Standing up to Mom like that. I don't know if I could have done it." "You could have," I told her. "You're stronger than you think." "I should have seen it. I should have questioned her. She's your mother. You trusted her. That's not a weakness, Sarah. That's love." The renovation Michelle had paid for was actually beautiful. The kitchen had new cherry cabinets with soft close drawers, granite countertops in a warm gray tone, and stainless steel appliances that gleamed under the recessed lighting Carlos had installed. The bathrooms had been completely redone with subway tile and modern fixtures. The oak floors had been refinished to a honey-colored glow. I walked through my house in a daze the first day, touching everything, hardly believing it was mine again. The first night back in my own bed felt surreal. The mattress was the same one I'd slept on for 15 years, but it felt different somehow. Firmer, more real. The sounds of the house at night, the settling of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic on Frankfurt Avenue, were like a forgotten song I'd suddenly remembered all the words to. I lay awake for hours, listening to my house breathe around me, feeling the weight of what I'd reclaimed. The kitchen was everything I'd dreamed of for 20 years. The cabinets closed silently, no more slamming or sticking. The countertops were smooth and cool under my fingers. The stove had 6 burners and a double oven. The refrigerator had a water dispenser built into the door. I stood in the middle of that kitchen and thought about the $47,000 I'd given Michelle for her divorce, the money I'd saved for my own renovation. She'd used my sacrifice to build her dream, and now, through a twist of fate and justice, it had become mine after all. I sent Michelle a thank you note, just a simple card with 3 sentences. Thank you for the beautiful renovation. The $82,000 you spent has created the kitchen I've dreamed of for 20 years. I appreciate your investment in my home. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to understand that her money, her scheme, her elaborate plan had ended up benefiting exactly the person she'd tried to rob. Sarah started visiting every Sunday, just like she'd promised. We cooked dinner together in the kitchen Michelle had paid for. We tried new recipes, experimented with complicated techniques, laughed when things went wrong. Sometimes Sarah brought Daniel, the architecture student with kind eyes and careful hands who talked passionately about sustainable design. They'd sit at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed away my house 3 months ago, and talk about their plans for the future. Daniel would sketch building designs on napkins, explaining green building concepts, while Sarah added ideas about landscaping and stormwater management. They'd debate whether solar panels or geothermal heating was more cost-effective, whether bamboo or reclaimed wood made better flooring. I watched them build their future together, right there at my table, and I thought about what Michelle had thrown away when she chose greed over family. I rewrote my will with Richard Chen. We sat in his office on a rainy Tuesday in March, and I explained exactly what I wanted. Everything goes to Sarah now. The house, the accounts, the insurance policy, everything. Michelle is to receive nothing. Richard looked at me carefully. Helen, are you certain? I need to make sure this decision is made with full understanding and without coercion. I'm certain. I'm not punishing her out of spite. I'm simply accepting her own logic. She told me that everything I gave her was my job as a parent, that I'm not owed anything for it. Well, children aren't owed inheritances either, especially children who commit fraud. I'll prepare the documents, Richard said. The new will included a detailed letter explaining exactly what Michelle had done. Just in case she tried to contest it after I died, just in case she tried to claim I was incompetent or confused when I changed it, I documented everything. The forged power of attorney, the attempted guardianship, the stolen documents, the sale of my house without my knowledge. Just because I'm dead doesn't mean she gets to rewrite history, I told Richard. Marcus helped me press civil charges. Not the criminal ones. Those would have meant jail time, court trials, family drama that would have hurt Sarah more than Michelle. But civil charges for financial elder abuse. Helen, Marcus had said when we discussed the options, you have grounds for criminal prosecution. What Michelle did, the forgery, the fraud, the manipulation of a vulnerable adult, these are serious crimes. We could push for jail time. I'd thought about it. I'd imagined Michelle in an orange jumpsuit, sitting in a cell, finally facing real consequences for what she'd done. But then I'd thought about Sarah, about Jacob and Emma, about my grandchildren having to visit their mother in prison. Civil charges, I'd said. Financial restitution. I want my money back, Marcus. I want her to pay for what she took. But I don't want to destroy what's left of my family. You're more generous than she deserves, he'd replied. Maybe. But I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it for me. I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I chose justice, not revenge. Michelle settled for $127,000. Her lawyer tried to negotiate down, but Marcus was unmovable. That's less than what Mrs. Patterson lent your client over the years. We're being generous. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. Michelle's lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, had tried every angle. She'd suggested I was being vindictive, that Michelle had acted in good faith, that this was a family misunderstanding being blown out of proportion. But the documents didn't lie. The forged signatures, the false claims of incompetence, the systematic theft of my assets, it was all there, documented and undeniable. The check arrived 6 weeks later. I deposited it and used part of it to fund a scholarship at Penn State for environmental science students. The Helen Patterson Scholarship for Young Women in Environmental Studies. Sarah cried when I told her. "Grandma, this is incredible. Do you know how many students this will help?" "Tell me about it," I said. "There are so many brilliant women in my program who struggle with funding. Some of them work 2 jobs while trying to do field research. Some of them have to choose between buying textbooks and paying rent. This scholarship could change everything for them." She helped me establish the selection criteria. We decided the scholarship would prioritize first-generation college students, women from low-income backgrounds, students who demonstrated both academic excellence and a commitment to environmental justice. I heard through Sarah that Michelle and Derek's reconciliation fell apart without my house to move into. Apparently, their whole fresh start had been contingent on having a mortgage-free home to live in, one they hadn't had to pay for themselves. Without that foundation, their relationship crumbled again. Derek moved back to his apartment in the suburbs. Michelle stayed in her rented condo, the one she'd been living in since the divorce. Her catering business suffered too. The settlement became public record. Anyone who searched Michelle Patterson's name found the elder abuse case, found the documented evidence of what she'd done to her own mother. Some of her clients quietly stopped renewing contracts. Others asked pointed questions she couldn't comfortably answer. The business didn't fail, but it stopped growing. It stagnated. I didn't take pleasure in that. But I didn't feel guilty about it either. Consequences are just consequences. They're not punishment. They're just what happens when your actions catch up with you. You might think I feel sad about losing my daughter. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I see mothers and daughters having lunch together at the cafe on the corner, and I feel a pang of grief for what Michelle and I could have been. But mostly I feel free. I learned something important at 68 years old, something I should have known earlier, but had to learn through betrayal. The people who truly love you don't need to take from you to feel secure. They don't need you diminished to feel elevated. They don't need you erased to feel real. And the people who do? You don't need them in your life, not even if you gave birth to them. I still live in my house. I still have my independence. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own home, making my own choices, I think about what Michelle said. You don't need these things. She was wrong. I needed exactly these things. I needed to know I could still fight when someone tried to take advantage of me. I needed to prove I wasn't invisible just because I was old. I needed to show her, and myself, that being 68 doesn't mean being powerless. I needed to prove that age is just a number, and wisdom is what you do with the years you've accumulated. Sarah graduated from Penn State last month with honors. She got a job with a nonprofit in Seattle working on urban sustainability projects. Before she moved, she asked if I'd consider moving closer to her. "I want to be able to see you more than once a year, Grandma." I thought about it. Philadelphia is my home. This house holds 40 years of memories. But Sarah is my future. "Let me think about it," I said. "Sometimes reconciliation is possible." Sarah asked me once if I'd ever consider reconciling with her mother. I told her the same thing every time she asks. The door is open if your mother ever wants to walk through it with an honest apology. But I won't pretend this didn't happen just to make everyone comfortable. That's the difference between love and enabling. So far, Michelle hasn't walked through that door. I've heard nothing from her in 4 months. No calls, no letters, no attempts at communication. Sarah says Michelle tells people I'm stubborn, unreasonable, holding grudges over misunderstandings. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being the villain in Michelle's version of events, because I know the truth. And so does Sarah. And so do Marcus and Richard and everyone else who matters. I'm $78,000 richer from the settlement. I'm living in a beautifully renovated house that I own free and clear. I'm spending time with my granddaughter who actually loves me without needing something from me. Michelle is still scrambling to rebuild a business damaged by her own choices. She's still renting. She's still alone. The scales balanced themselves. And somewhere in Philadelphia, in a file cabinet in Marcus Okonkwo's office, There's a copy of my will with explicit instructions that when I die, Sarah gets everything, along with a detailed letter explaining exactly why. Just in case Michelle tries to rewrite history one more time. Just in case she tries to claim I was confused or incompetent when I cut her out. She won't get to control the narrative after I'm gone. I made sure of that. The other day, I was cooking dinner when Sarah called. "Grandma, I found an apartment in Seattle with an extra bedroom, just in case you ever want to visit for a few weeks, or longer." I looked around my kitchen, the cherry cabinets Michelle paid for, the granite countertops, the gleaming appliances. All of it beautiful. All of it mine. "Send me pictures," I said. "Maybe I'll visit. Maybe I'll even move, but it will be my choice." That's the thing Michelle never understood. It was never about the house. It was about the choice. It was about the right to decide my own life. She took that from me once. She'll never get the chance again. I'm $78,000 richer, living in my own home, in control of my own life. Michelle is still explaining to people why her mother sued her for elder abuse. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you mistake your mother's love for weakness, her generosity for stupidity, her age for incompetence. "You don't need these things," Michelle had said, talking about my home, my independence, my dignity. Turns out, I needed them more than I needed her. And I'm doing just fine. Understanding the psychology of family betrayal reveals something critical about human relationships and aging. Research from the National Center on Elder Abuse shows that financial exploitation of elderly parents by adult children has increased by 47% in the past decade. The perpetrators are often those who had received the most financial support during their lives, creating a tragic irony where generosity becomes vulnerability. The erosion of boundaries between helping and enabling is gradual. Parents who sacrifice repeatedly teach their children that their needs are secondary. Over time, this dynamic can transform into entitlement where the adult child views parental resources as extensions of their own finances. The moment a parent becomes perceived as vulnerable through age or health changes, some adult children see an opportunity rather than a responsibility to protect. What makes these situations particularly devastating is the isolation factor. Elderly individuals who are manipulated by their own children often face disbelief when they try to report the abuse. Society tends to assume family members have their elderly relatives' best interests at heart, making it difficult for victims to be taken seriously. The shame of being betrayed by your own child creates additional silence. But there's an important lesson here about agency and resilience. Helen's story demonstrates that age doesn't equal helplessness. The ability to recognize manipulation, gather evidence, and take decisive legal action proves that competence and strength can exist at any age. The key is maintaining connections outside the family system, people like Marcus who can provide objective perspective when family dynamics become toxic. The most powerful tool against financial elder abuse is documentation and independent legal counsel. Power of attorney documents should never be signed without full understanding and independent legal review. Wills should be kept with attorneys, not in locations where interested parties have access. Regular check-ins with trusted advisors outside the family create accountability. And perhaps most importantly, parents must understand that generosity to adult children should never come at the cost of their own financial security. The myth that good parents sacrifice everything for their children, even their own future welfare, sets up a dynamic where the parent becomes vulnerable to exploitation. Healthy boundaries protect everyone. If you found Helen's story compelling, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories about justice, resilience, and people who refuse to accept being victims. And before you go, there's another story queued up that you absolutely need to watch next. It's about a woman who discovered her husband's betrayal in the most unexpected way possible, and what she did next will leave you stunned. The video is on your screen right now. Don't miss it. This one's even more intense than what you just heard.